Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is conclude. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we can use this verb. The first way you might hear the verb conclude used is to mean to come to an end. So if you think about a program or presentation, you might hear someone in a more formal setting say this program will conclude at 7 p.m. or some other time. It can be used a number of other ways, and you'll see some examples of that in our practice sentences later on in the video. A second way to use the verb conclude is to mean to arrive at a judgment or opinion by reasoning. This particular definition is used in many different academic settings. For example, after you read a text, maybe it's a story, a passage from a newspaper, something else, your teacher might ask you, what can you conclude from this? What is your judgment or opinion using the information and your reasoning skills? A third way you might hear the verb conclude used is to mean to say in conclusion. And again, we might hear this used to describe somebody who was speaking. And an example of this, she concluded her presentation with these final thoughts. And there's some sort of explanation of it. A fourth way to say conclude, or to use the verb conclude, is to mean to decide to do something. I saw this particular usage today as a superintendent or leader of a school district was indicating that based on the very cold temperatures, the ice, the snow that is in a particular area of the country, the superintendent had concluded that school needed to be closed today for everyone's safety. You should know that conclude is a regular verb. If I want to make a progressive tense, I'm going to drop the E and then add ing to form concluding. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are made by just adding the letter D, since this verb already ends in an E. The base verb conclude, ends in a D sound. So our past tense ending is going to make an id sound. Concluded, concluded. You'll be happy to know I don't have any additional meanings for you using phrasal verbs, so that's going to allow us to practice using our verb of the day in a couple different verb tenses. Today we're going to practice the past perfect and the simple future using will. In the past perfect, we are describing an action that has been completed before a particular point in time or before some other action. To make the past perfect, we need to use the past form of have, that's had, and then we're going to use the participle form of the verb, which, since this is irregular, it's just the past tense ending. So let's look at an affirmative example. Within a matter of hours, the trial had concluded. So there are two parts, had concluded. It's noting that this occurred at some point in the past. To make a negative past perfect sentence, we need to insert not after the had. And you might hear many Americans use the contraction form hadn't. Here's an example of that. She hadn't concluded her remarks when others began to interrupt. So it's noting that action was not yet completed before the action of interrupting started. Finally, if I want to make a yes or no question in the past perfect, I'm going to start with had, then I'll have my subject, and then the participle form of the verb. Had doctors concluded what caused his illness? So this particular usage of the verb conclude is going back to that second definition of reaching a conclusion or a judgment through reasoning. Now, let's take a look at the simple future. Today, we'll focus on using will. Many times, will is used to make predictions. And the nice thing about this form of the simple future is that it's going to be the same no matter what our subject is. So we're going to use will, and then we're going to use our base verb, and that's just how we make this particular form of the future. So let's look at an affirmative example. The competition will conclude by the end of the day. So again, maybe this is someone's prediction that all the games will be over by this particular point in time. Now, if I want to make a negative simple future sentence, I need to insert not after will. And again, you might hear Americans use the contraction form, which is won't. Here's an example of this particular tense with our verb of the day. The latest vaccine trial won't conclude until May. If you're still following pandemic and COVID news, this is a sentence I've seen as many other companies rush to try and make vaccines that will help us hopefully put an end to this pandemic. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the simple future. To do this, I'm going to start with will, then I'll have my subject, then the base verb. Will this book conclude the series? So it's very common for many books and movies to sort of continue a story through multiple books, movies, etc. And so this is asking, will this last book bring the series to an end? Now, let's take a look at some words that are related to our verb conclude. And the first word we're going to look at today is the noun conclusion. Just like our verb, this can also have several different meanings. The first possible meaning of the noun conclusion is the summing up of an argument or text. Again, you're likely going to hear this noun used in an academic setting. So if you're focused on reading, again, you might have a teacher asking about the conclusion. But if you're writing, then our example sentence might be how you hear this noun used. So an example of this definition is every essay needs a strong conclusion. So it needs to sum up the argument, the point of this particular piece of writing. A second way to use the noun conclusion is to mean the end or finish of some type of event or process. Here's an example of this usage. At the conclusion of the presentation, we'll take questions from the audience. So it's saying at the end of the presentation. Finally, a third way to use the noun conclusion is to mean a judgment or decision reached by reasoning. That really connects back very nicely to one of the verb's definitions. So here's an example of this particular usage. Detectives reached this conclusion after weeks of investigation. So they reached a particular judgment or decision through gathering evidence, examining it, and reasoning through it. The next word we're going to look at is the adjective conclusive. It means decisive or convincing. And all of this sort of connects to describing evidence or someone's argument. Here is an example of this adjective. The World Health Organization did not find conclusive data on the origins of COVID-19. This is a particular sentence I saw within the last week or two describing doctors' investigations to better understand what caused our pandemic. The last word we're going to look at today is the adverb conclusively. This means in a decisive way that has the effect of proving a case. So again, think of the word convincing that was in our earlier adjectives definition. So here is an example of this adverb in a sentence. It's too early to conclusively determine how the disaster began. So this could be in connection to, unfortunately, a number of different events, but the sentence here is describing that there's no way to know exactly what caused or what thing has convincingly proven a particular start of a disaster. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.